The man I loved and grieved was alive, a ghost laughing at my funeral, having framed me for a crime that stained the work of my entire life. I am Eleanor Hayes, and I am 62 years old. For 8 months, my world had been a landscape bleached of color, a quiet monument to grief. Theodore Theo Vance, my husband of 37 years, the pillar of our Connecticut community, the co-founder of the Vance Children's Hope Foundation, was dead. Or so I believed. His sudden heart attack had taken him from me, a truth I accepted with the weary resignation of a woman who had lived a full, if now fractured, life. I never intended to spy on my own son. The thought itself was repugnant, a violation of the sacred trust built over decades of motherhood. But then again, betrayal often begins with the most innocent intentions, doesn't it? Like a tiny, almost invisible crack in a porcelain heirloom, spreading until the whole piece shatters. The security camera, perched innocently on a high shelf in the den, was meant to be a simple balm for my increasingly fragile nerves. Since the funeral, every creaking floorboard, every unexpected shadow in our sprawling colonial house, had made me jump. I felt haunted, not by Theo's memory, but by a sense of watchful paranoia I couldn't explain. I was visiting my sister in North Carolina, trying desperately to find some sliver of peace among the rolling Blue Ridge Mountains. On the 4th day of my trip, a restless, cold dread settled over me. Had I locked the gate? Had I remembered to disarm the alarm in the wine cellar? Petty anxieties for a widow, perhaps, but they gnawed at me. I opened the security app on my phone, the one the installation technician had promised was set it and forget it. I just wanted a quick, reassuring glimpse of my quiet, empty foyer. That is when the cold dread turned into a terrifying, visceral shock. They were there. Marcus and Chloe, my son, and my beautiful, sophisticated daughter-in-law. They had let themselves in with the emergency key I had entrusted to them. Initially, a wave of profound relief, a mother's relief, washed over me. Marcus had promised to check on things, and seeing him honor that commitment, despite his busy schedule as a corporate attorney, warmed the cold corners of my heart. But they didn't head for the kitchen to check the thermostat or the mail. Instead, they moved through the living room with a tense, focused energy that felt wrong. Their voices were low, muffled by the distance, but the microphone on the little red-eyed camera managed to catch snippets. "The den and the master bedroom are clean," Chloe whispered, her voice tighter than I had ever heard it. "It has to be in the study, Marcus. She hasn't touched his desk since before the funeral." My stomach clenched. Theo's study, the inner sanctum I had left exactly as he had, a dusty, pristine museum to a life I thought I knew. Why were they interested in that room? And why did they look like thieves casing a target? I frantically increased the volume on my phone until their words were a harsh, grating sound in my ear. They disappeared down the hallway for what felt like an eternity. When they returned, they looked entirely different. Marcus's usually calm, controlled face was ashen, slick with sweat under the foyer light. His hand was clenched around a small, tarnished silver key and a standard USB drive. Chloe, meanwhile, kept darting nervous glances toward the front windows and the lawn outside. "She can never know we had this," Marcus said, his voice clearer now as they paused near the mahogany table. His words were precise, but laced with a terror that made my blood run cold. "If this data is traced back to the foundation and Mom's signature, she'll go to a federal prison for decades." Chloe's eyes were wide. 37 years of marriage, Marcus. How could he not only steal every penny from a children's charity, but also make his own wife the scapegoat? He set her up perfectly. The word scapegoat echoed in the silence of my sister's guest room. The phone trembled so violently in my hand that I nearly dropped it. Prison? My signature? The Vance Children's Hope Foundation? That foundation was my passion, my legacy, the reason I even had 37 years with Theo. It was the source of my deepest pride. Theo was supposed to be the financial wizard who protected it, not the serpent who drained it. Then, Marcus's eyes, still wide and panicked, locked onto the camera's location. He hadn't seen me, but he saw the small, blinking red light. "Chloe," he choked out, his voice barely a breath. "The camera. The light is red. It's recording." Chloe's hand flew to her mouth, her gasp sharp and sudden. You said she never monitors technology. You said we were safe. Before either of them could utter another word, the feed cut to a jarring, absolute black silence. Utter, deafening silence. I sat there, frozen, staring at the blank screen, desperately tapping the icon to reconnect. Nothing. Someone, Marcus, without a doubt, had disabled the camera. My mind was a whirlwind of questions, each more painful than the last. What documents? What data? And most cripplingly, how could Theo, the man who kissed me goodnight every night, the man who cried with me over the struggles of the very children that foundation served, have done something so monstrous? The foundation's success was built on my name, my reputation, my tireless work connecting with donors and families. Theo had always handled the financial architecture, a fact I had never questioned, trusting him completely. My phone screamed, a jarring, alien sound in the stillness. Unknown number flashed on the screen. My heart hammering against my ribs, I answered, expecting Marcus to apologize, to explain. The voice that answered was deliberately disguised, pitched low and metallic through some kind of voice filter. Stop watching the recordings. For your own safety, Eleanor, forget what you saw. A profound chill, colder than any grief, slid down my spine. Who is this? Marcus? Your son can't protect you if you keep looking. Neither of you understands what Dr. Vance was involved in. The less you know about the foundation's missing funds, the safer you'll be. There are signatures, your perfect, elegant signatures, on documents detailing the transfer of nearly $8 million into offshore accounts. Transactions that would put you in federal prison for 20 years. Your husband made sure of that. The line clicked dead. I immediately tried calling Marcus. Straight to voicemail. Chloe, same result. The security app now required a new password, my old one was rejected. Something was catastrophically wrong. The overheard conversation, the threat, the chilling mention of $8 million, none of it fit the life I had known. I booked the first flight home to Hartford, ignoring my sister's frantic protests. As the airplane taxied down the runway, my phone pinged with one more text from the unknown number. Unknown, do not go back to that house. They are watching. Theo did not die of a heart attack, and he made sure you will take the fall for everything. My vision blurred. Theo did not die of a heart attack. I had stood by his casket, touched his ashen face. Hadn't I? As the jet lifted into the churning clouds, carrying me toward a home that now felt like enemy territory, one searing thought consumed me. After 37 years of absolute devotion, how well did I truly know the man named Theodore Vance? And what kind of monster frames his own wife for the theft of money meant for sick children? I was going home to find out, and the knowledge that he was still alive, lurking somewhere, only stoked the icy fire of my righteous fury. The taxi dropped me at the curb exactly at 9:43 p.m. The familiar silhouette of our colonial home, stark against the early June night sky, should have been comforting. The porch light was on, the ivy was neatly trimmed, and the American flag hung silently from its pole. Yet, the sight offered no solace. The familiarity felt like a cruel illusion wrapped around a terrifying, cold reality. You want me to wait until you are inside, ma'am? The cab driver asked, his eyes lingering on the dark, silent windows of the house. Just to be sure everything's all right? The words hung in the air, a tempting offer of safety. But I couldn't accept it. I needed to face this monstrous new truth alone. No, thank you, I replied, forcing a confident smile as I handed him a generous cash tip. My son is waiting for me. A necessary lie.my key slid into the front door lock and turned with a smooth, sickening click. The moment I stepped across the threshold, I noticed it. The house smelled wrong. A faint, almost imperceptible trace of Chloe's expensive, gardenia-based perfume mingled with something metallic and stale, the scent of disruption, of a violent, hasty search. I stood motionless in the grand foyer, listening. The house sighed and creaked, the normal sounds of an aging structure. But tonight, they sounded like accusations. I moved through the ground floor, flicking on lights, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Living room, untouched. Dining room, perfectly preserved. Kitchen, I froze by the granite countertop. A single, pristine white coffee mug sat in the sink. It wasn't mine. There was a bright, cherry red lipstick stain on the rim. Chloe wore soft pinks. This was the vibrant red of someone else, someone foreign to my life. Someone else had been in my house. Theo's study door was slightly ajar, a sliver of profound darkness visible through the gap. I had kept that door closed since his supposed death, preserving his private space like a sealed tomb. Now, a draft seemed to beckon from within. With trembling, icy fingers, I pushed the heavy oak door open and fumbled for the light switch. The destruction was immediate, violent, and utterly heartbreaking. File cabinets were wrenched open, their contents, my husband's meticulously organized life, strewn across the thick Persian rug. Bookshelves had been swept clean, the heavy volumes lay scattered like fallen soldiers. The worst part, the undeniable evidence that I was truly in danger, was the painting behind his desk. It was an abstract, expressionist piece Theo had claimed to love, a garish landscape I always suspected he had paid far too much for. The painting was gone, yanked violently from the wall, revealing a steel wall safe I had never known existed. The heavy door of the safe hung open, empty, its contents plundered. I stepped carefully through the debris, noticing the methodical nature of the ransacking. Drawer linings were pulled out, the fabric beneath slashed. Books weren't just knocked over, they were opened and shaken. This wasn't random vandalism, this was a deliberate, desperate search for something specific, something vital. My phone buzzed in my pocket, shattering the silence. Another text from the unknown number. Unknown, they did not find what they were looking for, but they will be back. Check the loose floorboard under his desk chair. He left you a breadcrumb. My breath hitched. My arms erupted in goosebumps. Whoever this was, they were either watching me right now, or they possessed an intimate knowledge of this house that even I, its owner for 3 decades, did not. I dropped to my knees, pushing Theo's heavy, worn leather chair aside. I ran my fingers over the hardwood floor near the wall. And there it was. Near the baseboard, one board shifted slightly, almost imperceptibly, beneath the pressure of my hand. I dug my fingernails into the edge and pulled upward. The board lifted with a slight groan, revealing a shallow, dark hollow. Inside lay a thin, legal-sized manila envelope. My hands were shaking violently as I retrieved it and tore open the seal. Inside was not money, nor jewelry, but a single, folded sheet of paper, a bank statement. The institution was not a familiar American bank, but one I had only heard of in crime documentaries, the Inter-Island Fiduciary Bank, located in the Cayman Islands. The account was in my name and the balance, the final line screamed a number that made the room tilt, $7,300,000. Attached to the statement was a copy of the account application paperwork. My name, printed boldly at the top. And beneath it, a signature. It was unmistakably my signature, or what I instantly realized was a perfect, chilling forgery. The elegant loop of the E, the decisive cross of the T, it was my handwriting, perfected and weaponized. The implications hit me with the physical force of a tidal wave. Theo had established offshore, illicit accounts in my name, without my knowledge, using funds stolen from our foundation. $7,300,000. Where had it all come from? His legitimate income couldn't possibly account for even a quarter of that sum. A sound, faint but decisive, echoed from the foyer. The front door opened and then closed quietly. I froze, clutching the document, instantly aware of the knife edge of my vulnerability. I was alone in a ransacked house, holding what was almost certainly the very object that murderous men were searching for. Footsteps moved through the foyer. Familiar footsteps. "Mom?" Marcus's voice called out, laced with a false cheer that instantly put me on edge. "Your flight wasn't supposed to land until tomorrow. Why didn't you call me? We could have picked you up." Relief warred fiercely with a searing, cold suspicion. Marcus and Chloe had been in this very room, talking about Theo framing me. Now, this chaos. The timing was too sharp, too precise, to be accidental. I slipped the document into the back pocket of my jeans and took a deep, steadying breath. In here, Marcus, I called back, trying to keep the tremor from my voice. He appeared in the doorway and stopped dead, his face cycling through immediate, wide-eyed surprise, then alarm, and finally, a profound and undeniable wave of fear. Jesus, Mom, he breathed out, glancing around the ravaged room. When did this happen? I was rather hoping you might tell me that, I replied, carefully rising from the floor. Since you and Chloe were just here, looking for something in this exact room. His eyes widened further, then narrowed as the realization dawned on him. The camera. You saw us. I heard you, too, Marcus. Something about accounts in my name that could send me to prison. Something your father did to make me his scapegoat. I took a deliberate step toward my son, forcing him to meet my gaze. Tell me what's going on. Now. He ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, a nervous, defensive gesture I recognized instantly. It was a tic identical to one his father used to cover a lie. Mom, it's complicated and dangerous. You need to pack one bag and come stay with us. We need to figure this out in a secure location. I am not going anywhere, I said, my voice hardening with an absolute certainty that surprised even myself. Not until you explain what I saw you doing in your father's office, what these mysterious accounts are, and why someone broke in and destroyed my home. Marcus's gaze darted to the open, empty safe, and then back to me, the anxiety in his eyes escalating. Did they find what they were looking for? How would I know? I crossed my arms tightly across my chest. Until 10 minutes ago, I didn't even know that safe existed. 37 years of marriage, and it seems I didn't know a lot of things about the man I slept next to. My son's composure crumpled. In that terrible moment, he looked vulnerable, more like the little boy who used to run to me with a scraped knee than the formidable corporate attorney he had become. Mom, Dad wasn't who you thought he was, he whispered, glancing nervously toward the study windows, bathed in the silent moonlight. He wasn't who any of us thought he was. But we cannot talk here. It is not safe. Not safe? I repeated, incredulity giving way to pure, blinding rage. This is my house, Marcus. Your father has been dead for 8 months. What could possibly, Dad's not dead, Mom. Marcus interrupted me, his voice barely a raw, shaky whisper. And that's just the beginning of what he lied about. The room seemed to spin violently. I reached out and gripped the edge of Theo's heavy oak desk to steady myself, the wood cold and hard beneath my palm. That's impossible, I managed to say. I identified his body. I watched them lower his casket into the ground. Marcus shook his head, his eyes haunted by a truth too terrible for me to yet comprehend. You identified a body, Mom. But it wasn't Dad's. Before I could process the sheer, devastating bombshell that my husband was alive, a ghost who had walked away from his life, his wife, and his own grave, headlights swept across the study window. A large, dark car pulled silently into the driveway. Marcus tensed, moving instantly to the window to peer through the heavy velvet curtains. We have to go, Mom, he said, his voice dropping to a low, desperate plea. Now. Out the back door. I'm not moving until you explain who was in that casket, I demanded, the shock replaced by a furious, cold clarity. He cut me off, his hand gripping my arm with a shocking strength. Mom, please. Those men are not here to explain anything. They are here to find whatever Dad hid, and they don't care if you are alive when they leave. The porch floorboards groaned beneath the weight of heavy, decisive footsteps. The doorbell rang once, an absurdly civilized sound given the context of utter, terrifying chaos unfolding inside. Trust me, Mom, Marcus whispered, his eyes pleading. Just this one time. We need to run. And so, I ran. I ran from my own home, a place I had made into a sanctuary for 3 decades. I ran with nothing but my phone, my small purse, and a piece of paper bearing my forged signature on a criminal enterprise that I knew nothing about. I was 62 years old, and I was running like a common criminal through the meticulously manicured back garden toward the dense woods bordering our property line. As Marcus led me through the shadows, one thought burned hotter than all the others. if Theo wasn't dead, where had he been for 8 months? And what kind of man fakes his own death, frames his wife for the theft of charity funds, and disappears, leaving her to face the consequences of his unimaginable crimes? I knew the answer, and it was the kind of man I was now determined to find and make pay for every single hour of the grief he had forced me to endure. Marcus's dark-colored SUV was parked 2 streets over, a precaution that now seemed chillingly prescient. We reached it unseen, slipping through my neighbors' backyards like thieves in the night. The bitter irony was not lost on me. "Buckle up, Mom," he said, starting the engine but keeping the headlights off until we were well clear of the street. I complied mechanically, my body stiff with a shock that transcended emotion. "Where are we going?" "Somewhere safe. Chloe is waiting." "It is an apartment owned by Detective Brooks." "Marcus," I said quietly, the stillness in my voice a weapon. "If you do not start explaining this horror right now, I am going to open this door and roll out of this moving vehicle." He glanced at me, assessing his mild-mannered, retired librarian mother. Whatever he saw in my fierce, determined expression convinced him. He pulled onto the main highway and sighed heavily. "Okay. The shortest version is this: about 3 months ago, Chloe and I received an anonymous package. Inside was a flash drive containing financial records from Dad's private accounts and the Foundation's ledgers. It showed he had been running an elaborate embezzlement operation for years, stealing funds from the charity and routing them through a complex series of shell companies and offshore accounts." He made a sharp, sudden lane change. The records clearly indicated multiple shell companies, all based in tax havens, and all of them, every single one, had your perfect signature on the founding documents. "I never signed any such things," I insisted, my voice tight. "I know that, Mom," he replied, his jaw clenched. "The signatures were expert forgeries. Absolutely flawless. He made sure that the entire paper trail led directly to you. Your status as co-founder, your lack of financial oversight, it made you the perfect fall guy. I hired a private investigator, a former Federal Bureau of Investigation agent named Detective Brooks, to look into it quietly," Marcus continued, his voice strained. "He quickly discovered that Dad had been systematically siphoning money from the Foundation and a handful of wealthy, private clients for well over a decade, routing it all through these shell companies." "That's impossible," I whispered, holding fast to the last frayed thread of my old life. "Theo was the most ethical man I knew. He was a saint in this community." "Dad was a con artist," Marcus cut in harshly. "A very good one, good enough to fool his own family, his community, and his investors for 37 years. The brutal assessment hung between us like a poisonous gas." I wanted to scream a defense for Theo, to insist that there must be some terrible mistake, but the cold, empty safe and the bank statement in my pocket argued otherwise. The proof was undeniably in my hands. "2 weeks ago," Marcus continued, his tone softening slightly, "Brooks told me he found something huge. Something that suggested Dad was still alive." My breath caught in my throat. "What did he find?" "Security footage from a private, exclusive retirement community in Florida, not Chicago," Marcus corrected, adding a new, horrifying layer to the deception. It showed a man matching Dad's exact description using the name Elias Thorne. The footage was from 4 months after his funeral. My mind spun again. Florida. Theo had always hated the heat. But he had traveled constantly for Foundation business and client conferences, often extended trips of 2 or 3 weeks. There were always excuses: tax seminars, donor meetings, grant reviews. "There is more, Mom," Marcus said, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "According to Brooks, Dad has another life down there. He has been living openly as Elias Thorne, an investment advisor, complete with a partner named Charlotte and a luxurious condo overlooking the ocean. He has been gone for 22 of the last 37 years. The world tilted again, but this time I felt a strange, cold calm descend upon me. I pressed my hands against the dashboard, fighting the profound wave of nausea. "That is not possible," I whispered, the words tasting like ash. "We have been married since I was 25 years old." There is absolutely no way he maintained a second family for over 2 decades without me knowing. He traveled constantly, Mom, Marcus reasoned gently. 2-week fundraising drives, monthly client dinners, international grant reviews. You never questioned it because that was just Theo's job. You were dedicated to the foundation, he was dedicated to the money. His voice was full of regret. I am so sorry you have to find out this way. We drove in silence for several long minutes, my mind struggling to reconcile the man I thought I knew, the kind, benevolent, charitable Theo, with the monster Marcus described, a thief, a bigamist, a man who would frame his devoted wife for the theft of millions of dollars intended for sick children. Why would he fake his death? I finally managed to ask, the question thin and brittle in the air. Brooks thinks the scheme was finally collapsing, Marcus replied, his voice heavy. The foundation was due for a massive, independent audit. Several large donors, particularly the wealthy ones who funded the majority of the grants, were asking sharp, inconvenient questions. Dad must have realized it was only a matter of time before everything unraveled. He sighed, the sound a profound expression of his own pain. So, he created the perfect escape plan, stage a fatal heart attack, arrange a quick, closed-casket funeral, paid for entirely in cash, and disappear to his other life, leaving all the evidence pointing to you as the mastermind. But who was buried in his place? A Jane Doe from an anonymous morgue in an adjacent state. The funeral director was paid off a substantial amount of money. The closed casket ceremony was due to extensive damage from resuscitation attempts. Very tidy. Very cynical. We exited the highway, turning onto a small, unmarked dirt road. We finally stopped at a hidden, small cabin nestled deep among towering oak trees. Chloe's car was already parked outside. Welcome to Detective Brooks' safe house, Marcus said, switching off the engine. We have been using it as our base of operations for the past 3 weeks. Chloe met us at the door, her face a mask of worry and profound relief. She pulled me into a fierce, much-needed hug. You told her, she stated to Marcus, the observation not a question. She saw us on the security camera, Chloe, Marcus replied, his arm wrapping protectively around my shoulders. And someone ransacked the house looking for whatever Dad left behind. Susan, I am so sorry, Chloe whispered, using the wrong name in her distress, a small, jarring reminder of the massive upheaval in my life. I corrected her gently. Eleanor, dear. It's Eleanor. Eleanor, Chloe corrected herself, eyes shining with unshed tears. We desperately wanted to find undeniable proof of your innocence, the documents, the witnesses, before we burdened you with any of this horrifying truth. Inside, the cabin was sparse but surprisingly comfortable. There was a small living area dominated by a rustic wood stove, a tiny, efficient kitchen, and 2 bedrooms. But what immediately drew my eye was the wall. It was covered in a shocking, terrifying collage of photographs, documents, and index cards, all connected by intricate loops of bright red string, exactly like something ripped from the climax of a detective movie. I approached it slowly, feeling as though I were stepping into the monstrous, fabricated reality Theo had engineered. At the center of the gruesome exhibit was Theo's smiling photograph, linked by string to driver's licenses bearing different names and ages. Branching out were stacks of financial documents, property records, and a series of candid photos of a woman who was certainly not me. She was slightly younger, elegantly dressed, with striking blonde hair, standing beside Theo at what appeared to be a lavish resort wedding. Charlotte Vance, Chloe said quietly, coming to stand beside me. Theo's other wife. They have been together for nearly 25 years, as far as we can tell. He even bought her a condo in Key West and set up a successful private investment firm for her. I stared at the woman who had unknowingly, or perhaps knowingly, shared my husband for 2.5 decades. Had she been complicit? Or was she, too, another victim of Theo's masterful deception? Those men who came to the house tonight, I said, my voice barely a rustle. Who are they? They must be connected to the foundation somehow. We believe they are enforcers, Marcus replied grimly. They work for a large, shadowy collective of wealthy criminals who were using the foundation as a cover to launder their dirty money right under the nose of the FBI and the community. Dad wasn't just stealing from the charity, he was actively facilitating a criminal enterprise. And now they are exposed, Chloe finished, her voice cold with contempt. Because Theo disappeared with their substantial capital, an amount we estimate to be well over $20 million. I pulled the Cayman Islands bank statement from the pocket of my jeans. Is this what they were looking for? Marcus took the document, his eyes widening in alarm as he saw the bank logo and the account balance. Where did you find this? You did not tell us about this. Someone texted me, I replied, feeling an increasing sense of being manipulated by an unseen hand. An unknown number. They told me to check under the loose floorboard in Theo's office. Chloe and Marcus exchanged a worried, terrified glance. Someone else knows all this, Chloe said, her voice shaking. Someone who has been tracking every single move we have made. The question is whether they are trying to help us or manipulate us to reveal Dad's hiding place, Marcus added, examining the statement intently. This account number is incredibly valuable, Mom, but it is not enough to access the funds. This is just a key to a safe deposit box, not the entire vault. I sank onto a nearby, uncomfortable couch, suddenly bone-tired. So, what happens now? I cannot go home. The man I was married to is not dead, but is apparently a colossal criminal with a second family, and dangerous people think I know the location of millions of their stolen dollars. Now, said a new, calm, and utterly decisive voice from the doorway. We find Theo before his associates find you. I turned to see a tall, rugged man in his late 50s. He had salt and pepper hair, watchful, intelligent eyes, and the confident, battle-ready stance of someone intimately familiar with profound danger. Mom, this is Detective Brooks, Marcus said, introducing the man who now held the key to my future. The private investigator I told you about. Detective Brooks nodded in professional acknowledgement. Mrs. Hayes, I sincerely wish we were meeting under less explosive circumstances. Apparently, my life has been built upon a foundation of monstrous lies for 37 years, I replied, meeting his gaze directly. So these circumstances seem entirely appropriate. He almost smiled, a brief, genuine flicker of respect in his eyes. Your son told me you were resilient. Good. You are absolutely going to need to be. And why is that? I asked, pushing myself back to my feet. Because, he said, approaching the evidence wall and placing a hand on Theo's smug photograph. I have located your husband. And tomorrow, we are going to pay him a long overdue visit. I repeated the location, struggling to process Detective Brooks' plan as the first light of dawn broke over the towering oak trees surrounding the cabin. Florida. The retirement community. We are driving to Florida today? A private jet is faster and more discreet, ma'am, he replied, expertly packing surveillance equipment and what I recognized with a chill as a firearm into a nondescript black duffel bag. We leave in 2 hours. I had not slept a wink. After Detective Brooks' earth-shattering announcement, we spent the remaining hours of the night reviewing every single piece of data he had uncovered about Theo's horrifying double life. My husband, the man who had nursed me through a severe case of pneumonia, who had patiently taught me how to budget and manage the foundation's small accounts, who always forgot our wedding anniversary but made up for it with an elaborate, expensive, guilt-ridden gift, had been living a completely separate existence in the Florida sunshine. He was Elias Thorne, respected investment consultant, devoted husband to Charlotte, member of a prestigious yacht club, owner of a $3 million condominium in the most exclusive part of the coast. All this while simultaneously being Theodore Vance, my loving, community-focused husband of 37 years in Connecticut. I do not understand how this is physically possible, I said, staring intently at the laminated photograph of Elias Thorne. It was undeniably Theo, though with a heavier tan, a neatly trimmed silver beard, and sunglasses, a sophisticated, successful man I had never met. The sheer, logistical nightmare of maintaining 2 completely separate lives for over 2 decades was staggering. "It is not unheard of, Mrs. Hayes," Detective Brooks replied, carefully checking the action on his secured weapon. "Men whose jobs require constant, regular travel are best positioned to pull it off. Your husband had the perfect cover with the Foundation's expansive, international fundraising needs. 2 weeks with you, 2 weeks with her," Marcus added quietly, his voice hollow. "Remember how he always insisted that donor trips couldn't be rescheduled? How inflexible his travel dates always were." I did remember. For decades, Theo's trips were sacrosanct, immovable features of our yearly calendar around which everything else, from family holidays to my own doctor's appointments, had to be carefully arranged. I had cancelled family weddings, rearranged countless vacations, and sat through too many lonely evenings to accommodate his rigid, unyielding schedule. "All those long Christmas tours," I murmured, a particularly painful memory surfacing. 5 years in a row, he missed the entire week of Christmas, claiming he had to finalize massive year-end donations that absolutely could not be postponed. "He was with his other family," I stated, the realization a crushing weight in my chest. "Of course he was," Chloe said gently, placing a consoling hand on my shoulder. The final, missing pieces were aligning with a sickening, nauseating clarity. The separate bank accounts he had insisted on maintaining for Foundation overhead, the strict, impenetrable boundary around his study, the mysterious phone calls he would abruptly take outside, claiming poor reception, and his adamant, stubborn refusal to fully retire despite having more than enough legitimate savings. It was all a monstrously constructed facade. "Did she know about me?" I asked, pointing to Charlotte Vance's smiling face on the wall. Detective Brooks shook his head decisively. "My surveillance suggests she is as much a victim as you are. She genuinely believes Elias was in New York or London on business when he supposedly died. As far as she knows, he has been working remotely for the past 8 months, traveling to meet high-profile clients, but primarily based at home with her. So, he faked his death as Theo, but continued living as Elias, completely unchallenged," I summarized, the reality almost too bizarre to be true. "And now his $20 million of stolen, criminal money is missing, and dangerous people think I have it." "Exactly," Detective Brooks confirmed, snapping his bag shut. "Which is why a direct confrontation is our only viable option. He knows the ultimate location of the money, and that information is the only bargaining chip we have to guarantee your safety and freedom." I looked at Marcus and Chloe, who stood whispering near the kitchen counter. "Are you both coming to Florida, too?" They exchanged a look that conveyed both fear and absolute resolve. "I am coming, Mom," Marcus said. "I won't let you face him alone. Chloe is staying behind to coordinate with a forensic accountant friend who is reviewing all the Foundation's financial records. We need to understand the entire scope of what Dad was truly involved in." 2 hours later, I found myself passing through the blindingly normal airport security, carrying only a borrowed suitcase containing hastily purchased, impersonal clothes. The casual chaos of the airport, families heading on vacation, business travelers tapping on laptops, felt utterly surreal against the backdrop of my collapsing, manufactured life. "Once we land," Detective Brooks explained quietly as we waited at the gate, "we will establish discreet surveillance on the Thorne residence. Charlotte has a standing golf date on Friday mornings, which means Theo, or Elias, will likely be alone at home for at least 2.5 hours. "And then what?" I asked, my voice barely audible above the airport noise. "Do we just knock on the door and ask him why he framed me?" "Then," he said, his eyes serious and unyielding, "you confront the man who systematically tried to destroy you for his own selfish gain. And I make damn sure he doesn't disappear into another fake identity again." The flight passed in an anxious, nerve-wracking blur of rehearsed, hypothetical confrontations. What do you say to a man you loved and trusted for almost 4 decades, who has revealed himself to be an absolute, mythological stranger? How do you even begin to address a betrayal so profound it rips the very fabric of your reality? In Florida, we rented a nondescript, silver sedan and drove toward the prestigious coastal community. The contrast between the comfortable, slightly worn colonial I had shared with Theo and the sprawling, glass-walled contemporary mansion where he lived as Elias Thorne was the final, brutal twist of the knife. While I had meticulously clipped grocery coupons and maintained a careful, conservative household budget, he had been living in staggering luxury with his other, preferred family. We parked 2 streets away, and Detective Brooks used a professional-grade telephoto lens to confirm the house was occupied. A sleek, midnight blue Tesla, Theo's favorite car, sat prominently in the circular driveway. "That is Charlotte leaving now," Detective Brooks said, focusing the lens on an impeccably dressed blonde woman emerging from the front door. She climbed into a white Mercedes SUV and drove away, completely unaware that her husband's first wife, the one he had tried to bury with his crimes, was watching from less than 100 yards away. "Ready, Mrs. Hayes?" Detective Brooks asked, starting the sedan's powerful engine. "No," I admitted, my voice hoarse. "But let's do it anyway. The time for fear is over." We pulled into the expansive driveway. I experienced a moment of bizarre, profound disassociation as I walked up the paved path, preparing to knock on the front door of my husband's other life. Before I could second-guess the terrifying commitment I was making, I lifted my hand and pressed the polished steel doorbell. Footsteps approached, the sound muffled by the thick, imposing door. The door opened and there he was. Theo. Alive. He stood before me in tailored, crisp linen slacks and an immaculate navy blue polo shirt, a tumbler of amber liquid, bourbon, I instantly recognized, in his hand. Despite the early hour, his expression cycled through immediate annoyance, then profound, gut-wrenching shock, and finally, a profound and undeniable wave of pure terror as he registered my presence on his immaculate doorstep. "Eleanor," he breathed out, the color draining from his face, leaving it the white of a sheet. "Hello, Theodore," I said, my voice steady, cold, and utterly devoid of all emotion. "Or do you prefer to be addressed as Elias here?" He glanced past me, his eyes widening as he spotted Marcus and then Detective Brooks, who stood a formidable presence near the hedges. Calculation immediately replaced the shock in his eyes. Always thinking, always planning. That was the essence of Theo. Even now, caught in the ultimate, monstrous lie, his mind was desperately working angles, searching for the impossible escape route. "You had better come in," he said finally, stepping back from the wide, imposing doorway. "Before the neighbors start a rumor." Heaven forbid the neighbors witness this particular domestic drama, I thought bitterly, stepping across the threshold into my husband's fabricated reality. "We have a great deal to discuss," I announced, taking in the tasteful, modern decor, the massive windows, the abstract art that must have cost tens of thousands of dollars, and the family photos on the side table, Theo's smiling face alongside Charlotte and her 2 grown children from a previous marriage. A lifetime that had existed parallel to mine. Starting with why you are not dead, and ending with why you set me up to take the fall for the complete financial ruin of a children's charity. Theo closed the door, his expression unreadable, settling into a detached mask. "It is far more complicated than that, Eleanor." "I have time," I replied, meeting his gaze directly. "After all, according to my calendar, you have been dead for 8 months. This conversation is already long overdue." Theo's secondary living room was a stark study in contrast to our warm, traditional Connecticut home. Where I had favored comfortable, well-worn furniture arranged for intimate conversation, this space was a designer's hypermodern showcase, sleek leather sofas positioned to highlight a contemporary gas fireplace, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a manicured golf course. "Quite the upgrade from our humble colonial, Theodore," I observed, taking a seat on a pristine white sofa without waiting for an invitation. He remained standing, his eyes darting between me, Marcus, and Detective Brooks, who stood a formidable presence near the door, a silent, immovable obstruction to the most obvious escape route. "This is not what it looks like, Eleanor," Theo began, falling back on the classic, indefensible defense of guilty men. "Really?" I tilted my head, my anger now a cold, cutting blade. "Because it looks exactly like you have been living a massive double life for 2.5 decades, systematically stealing millions from a foundation you co-founded, and then faked your death, framing your devoted wife for all of your colossal crimes. Please explain how my interpretation is incorrect." Marcus stepped forward, his face etched with pure, righteous fury. "You set Mom up to take the fall. Your own wife." The mother of your son. That was not the intention, Theo muttered, moving to a nearby bar cart and adding a substantial measure of bourbon to his tumbler. Do you want a drink? This entire conversation certainly requires one. I am not here for a social call, I said, my voice ice cold. I am here because dangerous men ransacked our home last night looking for the money you stole. Money these ruthless men apparently believe I have. That detail finally shattered his composure. His head snapped up, a profound alarm evident in his eyes. They came to the house? Did they harm you? Would you care, Theodore? I asked, allowing the full weight of my contempt to finally show. You left me utterly exposed, vulnerable. Evidently, my safety was the least of your concerns when you were meticulously staging your convenient heart attack. He finally had the decency to flinch, a sharp movement of shame. It was not supposed to happen this way. Enlighten us, Detective Brooks spoke for the first time since entering the house, his voice low and dangerous. What was the entire, meticulously crafted plan? Theo stared at Detective Brooks, clearly trying to place him, failing to recognize the former FBI agent. You are certainly not law enforcement. No, Brooks agreed, his hand resting casually near his jacket pocket. Consider me the family's insurance policy. Something in his tone must have convinced Theo of the absolute seriousness of the situation, because he finally sank into a chair opposite me, suddenly looking tired and old. The money laundering was not my idea, he began, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. I was approached about 15 years ago by a client, Victor Sterling, a construction mogul with substantial political connections. He needed a mechanism to clean substantial cash flow from certain highly illegal international ventures. And you just agreed? Marcus asked, incredulity overwhelming his rage. Theo shrugged, a casual, terrifying gesture. The commission was substantial, Marcus. And once you start dealing with people like Sterling, it becomes nearly impossible to stop. These men do not accept resignation letters. So, you were cleaning dirty money, I said, the pieces of the puzzle fitting into a grotesque picture. For whom exactly? Initially just Sterling, then he introduced me to others. A real estate developer, a major technology executive, even a state senator. All needing highly questionable financial transactions kept strictly off the official record. He took a long, fortifying swallow of his bourbon. Last year, Sterling brought in someone new, a truly unpleasant, utterly ruthless man named Sergei Volkov, a Russian businessman with ties to the deepest criminal elements. The operation immediately expanded, doubling in volume overnight. And that is when your system began to crack, Detective Brooks surmised. Theo nodded weakly. Volkov demanded impossible, faster turnaround times and much larger volumes. The system I had carefully built could not handle it without raising massive, international red flags. I tried to scale back, but Volkov made it crystal clear that failure was not an option for him or his associates. So, you decided to disappear, I stated, my voice flat. But why frame me, Theodore? Why your wife? Something ugly flickered across his face, not guilt, but profound annoyance, as if I had merely identified a minor, technical flaw in his otherwise flawless plan. It was not personal, Eleanor. I needed someone to take the initial heat, and a spouse, particularly the co-founder of the charity, is the logical suspect. You were the perfect, obvious scapegoat. The plan was to vanish, let the initial heat fall entirely on me, and then have me cleared once you were safely away? I asked, the casual cruelty of his words stealing the very breath from my lungs. You were willing to let me be arrested, possibly imprisoned, for 20 years? How is that not personal? It was pragmatic, he insisted, looking me straight in the eye, utterly without remorse. You are 62 years old, with an impeccable criminal record, respected in the community. You would have earned a sympathetic judge, minimal sentencing, if any. I calculated the risks. You calculated the risks, I repeated numbly. For me. Without my knowledge or consent. You used my devotion, my reputation, my love for the foundation, as a shield for a massive criminal organization. I protected myself, he declared, the self-pity in his voice sickening. I had no choice. Tell Brooks that if he protects me, I will tell you where the access keys for the funds are. They are currently hidden in an off-site, impenetrable vault in Switzerland. Theodore, I said, finally rising to my feet. I walked toward the bar cart, poured his untouched bourbon down the sink, and placed the empty glass firmly on the counter. You have never protected anyone but yourself. You didn't leave those men a trail to me by accident, you engineered it. You didn't leave the bank statement under the floorboard by accident, you left it as a tempting, false trail. I reached into my pocket and retrieved the Cayman Islands bank statement and the forged signature. These men want me to lead them to you. And I have every intention of doing exactly that. Theo's face went white again. Eleanor, no. You cannot. I have already told Detective Brooks where to find the key to the Swiss vault, the one I found tucked inside the lining of my old wedding album, the one you thought you had destroyed, I lied smoothly, watching the absolute panic flood his eyes. You calculated the risk, Theodore, but you failed to account for one crucial factor, the fury of a woman who has nothing left to lose but her dignity. Detective Brooks stepped forward, placing a hand on Theo's shoulder. The game is over, Elias. You have a choice, cooperate with us to take down Volkov and Sterling, and your original wife walks free. Or, I step outside, and those men waiting down the street for a signal will know exactly where to find the man who stole their $20 million. $20 million. Theo looked from Marcus's cold fury to my absolute, unyielding resolve, and he finally, irrevocably broke. I stood over the wreckage of my 37-year marriage, no longer a grieving widow, but a warrior forged in the fires of betrayal. The man I loved was a lie, but the woman I became in that moment, fierce, strong, and unforgiving, was the most authentic version of myself. Let this be your harsh lesson, my friends. Trust is a gift, not a right, and sometimes the greatest love you can find is the one you find for yourself after the storm passes. The pain of betrayal is real, but the freedom that follows, the power to reclaim your narrative and your destiny, is priceless. Don't forget to subscribe and share this story with someone who needs to see that you can always rise again, because the next chapter is about rebuilding a legacy far stronger than the one that was stolen.